The most exciting car with a roof you can buy for under £30,000? You're looking at it right here. The Subaru WRX STi might have a smarter look in 4th generation form, but it's a familiar recipe under the skin, with a 2.5 litre turbocharged flat 4 sending 300 PS to each corner. More modern rivals claim more sophistication, but none of the thrills they deliver are quite the same as those you'll get at the wheel of this Subaru.
Nostalgia. There's a place for it, right? Especially when it comes to cars and when it comes to fast, affordable excitement. There aren't many that spark it as much as this one. Subaru's WRX STi. This model isn't called an Impreza anymore, but it's with predecessors that were so badged that its origins lie. Cars that back in the 90s dominated the World Rally Championship in the hands of legends like Richard Burns and Colin McRae. Subaru had to make road-going versions in order to compete at this level, and found that there was a ready market for them from those in search of supercar performance with an affordable price tag. The first Impreza WRX model was launched in 1994, and grey import versions flooded into the UK in growing numbers until the Fuji Heavy Industries brand finally decided to officially import it here with the launch of the 2nd generation version at the turn of the century. By now, though, there was strong competition, and primarily from ever more potent versions of Mitsubishi's Lancer Evo. Subaru had to respond, and did so in 2002 with the more serious STi version of this car that enthusiasts have loved ever since. It was powered originally, as it is now, by a 2.5 litre turbocharged flat 4, but a rather different one back then. Only with the 3rd generation STi model of 2007 was power boosted to the 300 PS output we enjoy today. In that Mark III version's lifetime, the Impreza badge was dispensed with to distance the car from humbler models, and an upgraded 330 PS power unit was also offered. Subaru decided, though, that this 4th generation design didn't need it, and finally relaunched the car here in 2014 as a more extreme, more involving and more affordable option to super hot hatches like Volkswagen's Golf R and Audi's S3. But is there still room for it in the modern market? I have a feeling it's going to be fun finding out. So, what's it like? Well, are we reprising the old Impreza legend here? Well, first impressions certainly make it seem that way. True, the interior no longer feels as if it's been sourced from parts available in Christmas crackers, but the focused, rally-bred sense of purpose is still as strong as ever. Firing the distinctive boxer engine delivers a further throwback. Its characteristic flat 4 throb certain to thwang the heartstrings of WRX devotees across the land. In other words, any fears that this car might have become slick and, well, different in its old age are very firmly groundless. For me, that's a relief. A muted, eco-muffled engine and a slush-moulded chrome-trimmed fascia would be attributes as out of place here as they would be on a World Championship touring car. So it seems a bit ridiculous to expect them. Yet that's exactly what the motoring press seems to have done in testing this car, comparing every aspect of it directly against the suave German super hatches now dominating an affordable, high-performance segment this car used to make its own. As usual, though, they've missed the point. Let's get real here. Almost no one likely to buy an S3 or a Golf R is going to give this Subaru the time of day. They'll hate the angular plastics, the notchy 6-speed manual gearbox, the loud and raucous soundtrack and the rock-hard ride. They'll question the lack of infotainment screen and modern electric power steering, and they'll frown over the fuel and CO2 figures, especially the fuel and CO2 figures. If you're of that mind in approaching the purchase of an affordable high-performance car, then I suggest you move right along. There's nothing to see here. Have they gone? Great. If you're still watching, then I'm assuming that you're someone with petrol rather than Perrier running through your veins. I'm assuming that you're someone who, like me, thinks that there's still a place in the modern day performance market for a machine that isn't politically correct in its recipe for excitement. People like that are going to love this car. For a start, it's very, very quick. The 2.5-litre turbo engine's 300 PS of power and 407 Newton-meters of torque will do that for you. It doesn't initially feel that way when first you put your foot down, and that's because this car delivers turbo lag at a level you might have mentally consigned to cars of the 90s. Subaru reckon this tweaked Euro 6 compliant engine has improved in this respect, but if it has, I'm just not feeling it. Now get beyond 3,500 revs though and the thing really starts to fly. 62 miles per hour flashing by in 5.2 seconds as the horizon spools towards you as if on fast forward. It's just as well that the Brembo brakes are mighty. On a straight road, it'd keep going all the way to 159 miles per hour, but you won't want to drive this STi on a straight road. No, as every rally-derived machine should be, it's at its best on the twisty stuff, preferably in the wet and preferably on a slippery surface. There's certainly a lot to be said for a car that can make 60 miles per hour on a country lane feel ridiculously exciting. I know that if I drove the same route in an Audi S3, I'd probably be wondering what to have for dinner when I got home. In this Subaru, you're always absolutely hardwired into the experience of keeping the thing on the road. That's the challenge you'll want it to be if you're one of those likely to appreciate this car. You'll have to adjust to the gritty way the 6-speed manual gearbox reluctantly clunks into each ratio. No fancy paddle shift autobox options here, of course. And, as I referenced earlier, there's no anaesthetised electric power steering either. Good. There's still something to be said for an old-fashioned hydraulically powered helm on a car like this. It means that you feel every granule of the road's surface back through the grippy 3-spoke sports steering wheel. Unfortunately, you feel it through the seat of your pants too. A colleague reckoned he'd used trolley jacks with more suspension elasticity than this Subaru. Now, I'm not sure I'd go that far, but you get the point. For a car that's officially called a WRX STi Type UK, it doesn't seem too UK specific in its suspension tune. It's true that there have been changes, stiffer cross members and thicker anti-roll bars feature, plus there's a body shell that's claimed to be 140% stiffer. The result, though, is just as totally track-focused as it ever was, which means that the harder you drive it on our appalling bumpy back roads, the more agitated it seems to get. Subaru's chassis engineers need to get away from their billiard table smooth test circuits once in a while and appreciate real-world driving conditions. Any number of rivals have proved that even if you're not going to rely on fancy active damper systems, you simply don't need springs this harsh to keep body roll appropriately in check in a car like this. But hey, I'm coming over all auto car again. The whole point of this car is to deliver a competition car experience for the road. Well, it does, as anyone who's actually driven a competition car will tell you. Once you've mastered the intricacies of the handbook, you can set the thing up like a competition car too, with intricate adjustment possible in two main areas. Now, let's start with the way that, as the previous generation model did, this one lets you fiddle with the center differential to prioritize either straight line performance or agility through corners. Now, most will want to leave the car in the auto setting that in any given situation decides for you, but those who must fiddle, there's an Auto Plus mode that prioritizes traction, an Auto Minus mode that prioritizes steering response with agility, and finally a completely manual setting that allows you to make all the decisions for yourself. More dynamic choices await you with the Subaru Intelligent Drive System, SI Drive for short, which allows selection of one of 3 modes that alter both engine and throttle response. It's a sign of our times that one of them, I for intelligent, is aimed at keeping the engine relatively economical, with a change-up light for efficient driving. do the decent thing and ignore that, or go buy a turbo diesel. The second setting, S or Sport, is the normal one, but it's only when you switch the setting to this one, S hash or Sport Sharp, that the power boost becomes neck snapping. Get all your configurations right, and as I've already suggested, this car can catapult through a set of twisties with a glorious yowl and incredible agility, aided by a torque vectoring system that lightly brakes the inside front wheel through tight bends, sharpening turning and ensuring that all the power gets onto the tarmac. It's even more fun if it's wet, thanks to a symmetrical all-wheel drive setup that uses a viscous limited slip differential to alter the 50-50 torque split front or rearwards depending on wheel slip. The adjustment isn't as smooth and subtle as it would be on the arguably more sophisticated modern Haldex reactive systems you'd get on modern rivals. Nothing about this car, though, is smooth and subtle, which is probably as it should be. You'd know this was a WRX, wouldn't you? Certainly almost everything else you expect this car to visually deliver is present and correct. Tick off deep front spoiler, huge gaping bonnet scoop, ground-hugging side skirts and enormous rear wing. It might not be pretty, but it definitely has presence, especially when painted in this iconic WR Blue Pearl colour scheme and fitted with the gold wheels so beloved by the STi faithful. Up front, the trademark hexagonal grille is now gloss black and flanked by smarter Hawkeye-style LED headlamps and lower-placed front fog lights that together aim to emphasise the car's wide, low stance. Now, that bonnet scoop has been more deeply embedded and moved forward in this design to help with a sleeker look that's further aided by the way that these front A-pillars have been moved forward by 200mm. Move to the side and you begin to appreciate just how different this Mark IV STi model is in comparison to its previous generation predecessor. The wider, shorter door mirrors look sportier, as do menacing 18-inch multi-spoke alloy wheels that sit in bulging arches. Now these, along with the high waistline, mask the reality that this car is actually quite a lot bigger this time round. Sit one of these next to an earlier WRX and you really appreciate just how much shape and sophistication has been built into the panels. Now take the way that here at the rear end, the bulging rear wing blends into this tapered boot lid. Now there's also a purposeful dark finish diffuser down here housing 4 exhaust tips. While moving further up, this shark fin antenna is the finishing touch to the trailing edge of the roof. It's all very nicely executed. Of more importance, though, are the improvements you can't see. Subaru has yet to get its head around the structural use of aluminium, but it has better mastered the use of ultra-high tensile steel, which has resulted in an astonishing 140% improvement in body shell rigidity. Subaru claims the shape to be a deceptively spacious one too, despite dimensions that on the face of things seem little different than those of the third generation version. You appreciate that when sat here at the rear, where another 25mm of extra wheelbase and another 15mm of cabin width combine to create a slightly more spacious feel. It's still really only comfortable for a couple of adults, but there's certainly more leg, shoulder and elbow room than there was before, and a raised hip point makes it easier to get in and out. It's easier to get in up front too, thanks to wider door openings and lower side sills. Once you do, you'll have to manage your expectations, for no attempt has really been made here to match the slush-molded sophistication you'd find in a rival Golf or Audi S3. This is a cabin for driving, not one for relaxing in. Owners of the previous generation model will understand that, and people of that sort are likely to be very happy with the improvements Subaru has been minded to make. For a start, moving the front A-pillars forward and adding a quarter light to the front window has created an airier, more open feel while improving visibility that's also better rearwards, and that's thanks to the way that the rear wing has been positioned higher up. Now, it's also easy to get a comfortable driving position, as alignment of the grippy wheel and the lovely aluminium pedals is good, and there's plenty of adjustment in the steering column. Less impressive is dashboard architecture that Subaru has vainly tried to update with various soft touch surfaces and splashes of red trim and carbon fibre. Nor does it help that a rather over-buttoned, though very effective, audio system replaces the smarter centre dash infotainment screen that you'd find on European versions of this car. Now, driving information instead is delivered by a much smaller 4.3-inch multifunction display placed rather out of your line of vision at the top of the centre stack and controlled by this curious toggle switch that's positioned between the central air vents. Now, master this and the WRX can brief you on the intricacies of its turbo operation or presently preferred driveline modes. Now, to be honest, you won't really be using it that much. There are positives though. You love these superbly supportive sculpted STi embossed front sport seats that, beautifully trimmed in leather and Alcantara, position you perfectly in front of the small diameter flat bottom leather stitched sports steering wheel. Through it you glimpse a dual dial display that's bathed in evocative red lighting and headlined by a 3.5-inch LCD screen flanked by white needled gauges that are finished with smart aluminium rings. Now, on a more practical note, there's plenty of space for oddments with 4 large door pockets that are big enough for decently sized bottles, plus a large central storage tray, a covered centre console box and useful armrest storage. And out back, well, there's a larger boot than you might expect. 40 litres bigger than before and now 460 litres in size. Plus, it's extendable with a split folding fold forward rear bench if you find that you really can't resist the latest flat pack furniture offer. You will, after all, need a few practical points to help in justifying this car to others who simply won't understand it. So, what's on offer here with this WRX STi? Turbo power, 4-wheel drive, 4 passenger doors, a 300 PS power output and a £30,000 price tag. Sounds like a familiar formula, doesn't it? That's because it is. The Germans have borrowed the concept for exactly this kind of car. It's primarily in the form of Audi's S3 and the Volkswagen Golf R, comparable 5-door versions of which sit a couple of £1,000 above this Subaru's asking price. We'll get to them in a minute, but before we do, let's focus on what's on offer here. A single 4-door body style offered with 1 complete spec. Now that means if you were hoping for uprated engine options or a paddle shift auto transmission alternative, you'll be disappointed. Well, for the time being at least. Still, Subaru assures us that this recipe is exactly what the majority of buyers in this market will want. And they're probably right. Time to look at exactly what market that is. Now, clearly, this kind of car sits a class above the faster, conventional family hatch-based shopping rockets, models like Vauxhall's Astra VXR and the Megane Renault Sport 275, which makes it look quite tempting, given that you could easily spend this Subaru's £29,000 budget on optioned-up versions of both the hot hatches that I just mentioned. Now, even a plushly specified version of a feebler Golf GTI could cost you that sort of money. Now, compared to these kinds of cars, the Subaru feels noticeably more muscular. Things get a bit tougher for it when you ramp up the level of competition to include the latest generation of super hatches that represents more realistic rivals. Now, the Audi S3 and the Golf R I've already mentioned. Then there's the 318 brake horsepower 4-wheel drive Ford Focus RS. Plus, if you're prepared to swap 4-wheel drive for rear-wheel drive, then BMW's muscular 325 PS M135i enters the equation for much the same sort of money. Now, you'd need a £38,000 budget, though, for the Mercedes entrant in this segment, the A45 AMG, though that car does offer a much pokier 360 PS power plant beneath the bonnet. There's no getting around the fact that all of these Teutonic options are more polished than this Subaru, cheaper to run and easier to drive too. But are they as extreme, as special? Do they have the same degree of motorsport-derived magic? Buy an S3, a Golf or an M135i, and ultimately, at the end of the day, all you're getting is a spruced up A3, Golf or 1 Series. Buy a WRX STi and the feeling will be very different every time you look at it on the driveway. Maybe you can remember the rallying successes of great names like McRae, Burns and Solberg. Perhaps you were one of those who stood in the forest and watched them, or wished you had. Either way, for such a person, this car retains an irresistible appeal. This Subaru's appeal isn't just for dyed-in-the-wool rally fans either. Maybe you're one of those who think a performance car should look, feel and sound like a performance car, and to hell with emissions, refinement and political correctness. For you too, this is your dream ticket. Either way, if what I'm saying makes sense, then you'll have more than a passing interest in just how generous that Subaru's UK importers have felt able to be when it comes to the spec of this car. Let's see. You'll search in vain for flashy camera-based driver assistance or internet-connected services and the like. Still, I'm guessing that most prospective WRX buyers won't have features like those too far up their priority lists. But dark gunmetal, or in this case gold, 18-inch aluminium alloy wheels shod with grippy Dunlop SP Sport Max tyres, a huge rear wing, a twin dual exhaust muffler, side under spoilers and piercing LED headlamps and taillights, well, that's more like it. You also get headlamp washers, power folding heated mirrors, a Thatcham Category 1 alarm, rear privacy glass and huge 17-inch Brembo brakes. Inside, there's sport seats finished in leather and Alcantara, dual zone climate control, Bluetooth phone compatibility, push button start, aluminium pedals, cruise control, an electric boot opener and split folding rear seats. Now there's also stitched leather both for gear knob and for a steering wheel from which you can control a 6-speaker stereo with iPod, aux-in and USB inputs. Now you'd have to pay extra for some of this stuff on pricier German rivals. Just the LED lights alone tack around £800 to the price of an Audi S3 for instance. Best of all perhaps, this Subaru includes as standard a satellite security tracking system. I can't think of another car that needs this more. And beyond that, well, it's worth mentioning that you need to pay extra if you want any colour other than crystal white. Go for this car's WR Blue Pearl finish, or indeed dark grey metallic or crystal black silica, and you'll find another £500 added to the bill. As for options, well, the gold wheels I just mentioned aren't officially specified on the extras list, but since this car has them, I'm sure you could twist your dealer's arm and get yourself a set. Otherwise, the only accessory listed is an add-on Pioneer satellite navigation system. Unfortunately, there isn't a more integrated factory-fit sat-nav setup available. If that's a disappointment for you, then perhaps it's worth finding out whether Colin McRae's old co-driver Nicky Grist is available for hire. Right 4, 500, no cut, jump would be more in keeping with this car's character than repeated requests to make a U-turn if possible. Safety-wise, there's Subaru's VDC, Vehicle Dynamics Control Stability System, the status of which you can monitor on the central multifunction display. Like the TCS traction control system, you can switch it off for track-style antics, though even then, the torque vectoring setup remains engaged for sharper cornering turning. Otherwise, there's anti-lock brakes with brake assist for emergency stops, tyre pressure monitoring and fantastic Brembo brakes that could well keep you out of a prang in the first place. If all that and symmetrical all-wheel drive should fail to keep you out of the hedge, then there's the peace of mind of twin front, side and curtain airbags, plus a driver's knee bag, Isofix child seat fixing, anti-whiplash seats, a pedestrian-friendly bonnet and a decoupling brake pedal mechanism. Now, it all explains why the industry rates this car so highly in safety terms. Indeed, it was awarded top safety pick status following crash safety testing by the USA's Insurance Institute of Highway Safety. Now, that accolade being the highest possible safety ranking the organisation provides. There's no real getting around the fact that if you want one of the most exciting cars on the road, you're going to have to pay for the privilege. You won't be expecting this WRX STi to be a cheap car to run, and it isn't. The kind of efficient direct injection and variable geometry turbo technology that Rivals offers still doesn't seem to be figuring on Subaru's radar. And though the brand talks of tweaks made to the ECU, a more effective larger intercooler and EU6 compatibility, all this doesn't seem to have added up to very much in terms of a discernible improvement over what went before. As a result, even if you burble along with the car obediently set in the SI drive system's most efficient I or intelligent mode, the quoted combined cycle fuel figures is still only 27.2 miles per gallon. And as usual with this kind of car, if you get anywhere near even that on a regular basis, then you probably shouldn't have bought a thing in the first place. Emissions are pegged right up at 242 grams per kilometre. Now, you'd expect the more modern, eco-minded engines to be much cleaner and greener than this, and of course they are. A Golf R and an Audi S3 both manage 40 miles per gallon on the combined cycle and only just over 160 grams per kilometre of CO2. Now, here's the key point though. Despite all that, when it comes to overall running cost figures that take everything into account, this WRX is actually only just behind the Germans, rated at 79.3 pence per mile compared to 69.2 pence per mile for the Volkswagen and 68.4 pence per mile for the Audi. In fact, this Subaru actually betters something like a Renault Sport Megane in this respect and gets within 5% of something like a BMW M135i, which is actually pretty impressive. How so? Well, the saving grace here comes with this car's outstandingly high residual values, which you might be surprised to learn aren't actually very far away from those of a Golf R. Some, in fact, have gone further than that. In the States, for example, this car has been honoured at the country's influential ALG Residual Value Awards for keeping the highest percentage of its original value over a 3-year ownership period. Closer to home, independent experts Cap Monitor reckon this Type UK version will retain over 48% of its value and will be worth more than £14,000 even after you've been flinging the thing about for 36 months. This compares with an industry average of under 40%. All of that's down to two things. First, this car will be a rare sight on our roads, so the laws of supply and demand kick in if you can't get hold of one. Now, secondly, there's a small but loyal band of buyers here who can't stretch to a new model but would dearly love to get their hands on yours once you've finished slinging it about. Now, they won't be business folk, mind you. This car attracts a top-of-the-shop 35% benefit-in-kind taxation rate for any company user who might be tempted. And prospective customers will need an understanding broker too, given that this car has an insurance grouping of 40E. All this is backed up by Subaru's excellent reliability record, though you don't get the 5-year warranty the brand includes on its other products. A 3-year, 60,000-mile warranty is included. Servicing is needed every 10,000 miles. The German brands think they've plagiarized the formula that for so long has made this car so special. True enough, if you're in search of something relatively affordable with 300 PS, turbo power and 4-wheel drive, there'll be easier, more accessible options for you than the one that Subaru provides here. Don't expect them to give you a unique experience though. Don't expect a car that in standard production form is capable of shattering the Isle of Man TT road course record. Don't expect a Subaru WRX STi. This car could have gone the way of its original arch-rival Mitsubishi's Evo and shuffled off into obsolescence, a car no longer in tune with today's eco-conscious take on high performance. Or Subaru could have thoroughly modernised it, slashing the weight, simplifying the driving dynamics and borrowing more heavily from lesser production models. Enthusiasts should give thanks that the brand has done neither of these things. A WRX is still, thank goodness, a WRX. The letters stand for World Rally Experimental, a reference to the toe in the water the original version of this car represented when Subaru, then a company famed only for country 4x4s, first took on the global rally giants with it in the early 90s. A quarter of a century on, this super saloon still parties like it's 1999, and so do the folk who own the thing. For them, every journey remains an experience, a competition throwback, a challenge to be mastered. These people neither expect nor want a soft ride, cosseting refinement or luxurious cabin decor, and would be mystified if the Fuji heavy industry brand's Subaru Technica International STi division were to provide these things. The motoring press doesn't understand this, but loyal owners do. Get beyond the surface irritations, and for the real enthusiast, there's an addiction here that's hard to resist. The rush of the turbo when it comes on song, the way the wheel writhes in your hands as you stamp on the brake pedal and throw the car into a bend, the astonishing traction that pins you to the road surface like an unseen hand. For the WRX faithful, it'll all be quite magical. If you're among their number and think the best and fastest modern hot hatches are just, well, that bit too civilised and boring, well, you know what to do.